Listen, I need to tell you about what just went down on SportsCenter tonight, because honestly, I'm still trying to process what I watched, and I think everyone who tuned in is in the same boat right now. I had the show on in the background while I was making dinner, not really paying full attention because it was just supposed to be Warriors Heat coverage. A nice little Andrew Wiggins tribute game situation, feel-good story about a former champion returning to the Bay Area. But then, everything changed in an instant, and suddenly, SportsCenter became this somber, almost funeral-like atmosphere as we all witnessed what might have been a career-altering, possibly career-ending injury to one of the most unique players in the NBA. I'm talking about Jimmy Butler going down with what appears to be a catastrophic knee injury, and the way the SportsCenter crew covered it. The respect, the gravity, the genuine emotion from everyone involved, it really drove home just how serious this moment was, not just for the Warriors' season, but potentially for Jimmy Butler's entire career. So let me set the scene for how this all unfolded on SportsCenter, because the coverage was actually really powerful, and I think it captured the shock and devastation that everyone watching felt in real time. Scott Van Pelt was anchoring, and initially the show was in this upbeat mood, talking about how special it was that the Warriors were honoring Andrew Wiggins with a tribute video and ceremony before the game. They showed clips of Wiggins' championship run in 2022, his defensive performances in the finals, all the great moments from his time in Golden State. SVP was talking about how classy it was for the Warriors organization to bring Wiggins back and celebrate what he contributed to their dynasty, even though he's now with Miami. Hey, what's up, everyone? Before we jump in, let me ask you something that takes 1 second. That like button, hitting it right now, helps this channel more than you know. It's how we reach thousands more fans with this content. Just smash that like button real quick. It's the biggest way you can support what we're building here. Every like matters, so hit it now. But then everything shifted. They cut to live footage from Chase Center, and you could immediately tell something was very wrong just from the body language of everyone on the court. The SportsCenter crew went silent for a moment, and then they showed the replay of what happened. Jimmy Butler was posting up, the Heat were running their typical action, where they front him and throw the lob over the top. Apparently, this is something he does all the time. It's a signature part of Miami's offense. He went up for the catch, came down awkwardly, and his right knee just completely buckled underneath him. The thing that really struck me watching the SportsCenter coverage was how they didn't show the injury on repeat, over and over like networks sometimes do. They showed it once, clearly, so viewers could understand what happened, and then they immediately cut away out of respect for Butler and the seriousness of the situation. SVP made a point of saying, "We're not going to keep showing that. Everyone saw what happened. Now we wait for information." And I really appreciated that restraint, because this wasn't entertainment. This was a human being potentially having his career end right in front of our eyes. The camera work during the actual injury was telling too, and the SportsCenter producers highlighted this. The broadcast didn't even cut to commercial. They just went to black for a few seconds. SVP was saying that's usually an indication that what happened on the court was so graphic or so serious that the production team made an immediate decision not to show it, which is extremely rare in modern sports broadcasting. He was speculating whether there was visible bone or some other horrific visual that made them make that call. And just hearing him talk about it in those terms really emphasized the severity of what we'd all just witnessed. Then they brought in their medical expert, I think it was Dr. David Chow, who does injury analysis for ESPN. And this is where things got really sobering. The doctor walked through what the injury likely was based on the mechanism and Butler's immediate reaction. And he was pretty clear that we're probably looking at a significant knee injury involving multiple structures. The question wasn't whether Butler hurt his knee badly. That was obvious to everyone watching. The question was whether it's just a meniscus tear or whether there's ACL involvement as well, and potentially other ligament damage. Dr. Chow made a point that really stuck with me, and SVP kept coming back to it throughout the show. He said that at Jimmy Butler's age, he's 35 years old, This type of knee injury is incredibly difficult to come back from even under the best circumstances. It's not like a 25-year-old tearing his ACL where you have youth and recovery ability on your side. When you're in your mid-30s and you suffer a major knee injury that potentially involves multiple ligaments and structures, the recovery timeline is longer, the rehab is harder, and the chances of returning to your previous level of play drop significantly. SVP actually said out loud what a lot of us were thinking but didn't want to say. This could be a career-ending injury for Jimmy Butler. He didn't sensationalize it or try to create drama. He said it matter-of-factly, with genuine sadness in his voice, because it's just the reality of the situation. A 35-year-old wing player whose game is built on physicality, on posting up smaller guards, on explosive first steps to get to the rim, on defending multiple positions. That player cannot afford to lose athleticism and explosion from a devastating knee injury. The SportsCenter crew then showed Steph Curry's reaction on the bench right after the injury, and this was one of the most powerful moments of the entire broadcast. Steph's face said everything. He knew. You could see it in his eyes, in his body language, in the way he was sitting there just staring at the court. This wasn't a, "Oh man, I hope Jimmy's okay" kind of look. This was a, "I just watched my teammate's career potentially end" look. Steph's been around basketball his entire life. He's seen every type of injury, and you could tell he immediately understood the severity of what had just happened. They had a really interesting discussion on SportsCenter about what this means for the Warriors, both in the immediate term and long term, and I thought they handled it really thoughtfully, instead of just jumping into cold transactional basketball analysis. SVP acknowledged that yes, we have to talk about the roster implications and what the Warriors do next, but first and foremost, this is about Jimmy Butler, the person, the player, the competitor who might have just played his last NBA game. But then, they did get into the basketball side of things, and this is where the conversation got really complex and interesting. Stephen A. Smith joined remotely, and he immediately started talking about how this injury completely changes the Warriors' calculus heading into the trade deadline. Just yesterday, the Warriors were reportedly trying to figure out what to do with Jonathan Kuminga, whether to trade him, what kind of package they could get, whether they should attach draft capital to acquire a win-now player. Now, with Butler potentially done for the season and maybe his career, do those plans change entirely? Stephen A. was speculating that the Warriors might now hold on to Kuminga and give him Butler's minutes to see what they have in him. Maybe there's a reconciliation between Kuminga and Steve Kerr. Maybe they have a heart-to-heart conversation about moving forward. Maybe Kuminga becomes the new Jimmy Butler in terms of his role on the team. It's not ideal, obviously. Kuminga is nowhere near the player Butler is in terms of basketball IQ and two-way impact. But if you're the Warriors and you just lost your third-best player to a catastrophic injury, you can't also afford to trade away your only young wing with upside. But then Brian Windhorst jumped in with a different perspective that I thought was really insightful. Windhorst was saying that Butler's injury might actually make him a movable contract now, as cold as that sounds. The Warriors traded significant assets to acquire Butler from Miami. They gave him a substantial contract, and they were banking on him being a key piece for their championship push this season and potentially next season. If he's now damaged goods, who might never play again, or who might come back as a shell of himself, does Golden State look to move that contract to clear cap space and financial flexibility? Windhorst was very careful to say he's not advocating for that. He's not saying it's the right move morally or ethically, but from a pure business standpoint, and the NBA is a business, teams have to consider these things. You can't have $30–40 million tied up in a player who can't contribute on the court, especially when you're the Warriors trying to maximize Steph Curry's final elite years. It's harsh, it's uncomfortable to discuss, but it's the reality of professional sports. The SportsCenter crew then pivoted to talking about the actual game itself, and this is where the storytelling got really powerful because they framed it as a team responding to tragedy with resilience and emotion. After Butler went down, and everyone in the arena realized how serious it was, the Warriors could have folded. They could have been so shell-shocked and devastated that they sleepwalked through the rest of the game, but instead, they rallied. They showed footage of Steph Curry going absolutely nuclear in the third quarter, just taking over the game with this fury and intensity that felt different from his normal brilliance. SVP was calling it a Curry flurry, but with an edge to it, like Steph was playing angry or playing hurt or playing with the weight of what had just happened to his teammate. The shots were falling, but there was no celebration, no showboating, just this grim determination to win the game for Jimmy. Then they showed Buddy Hield on the bench, and this genuinely got me emotional watching it on SportsCenter. They had a close-up camera shot of Buddy's face, and this is a guy who's always smiling, always cheesing, always having fun out there on the court. But in that moment, Buddy looked like he was fighting back tears. His eyes were watery, his expression was pained, and you could just see the emotional weight of what had happened written all over his face. The SportsCenter crew talked about how that's the sign of a connected team, a team that actually cares about each other beyond just being co-workers. When something tragic happens to one of your guys, it affects everyone, and the natural response is to try to honor that teammate by going out and winning the game. That's exactly what the Warriors did, and Buddy's emotional response captured that team bond perfectly. They also highlighted Brandon Podziemski's fourth-quarter performance, and apparently there was some trash talking and demonstrative behavior toward the Heat bench that was caught on camera. Podziemski was shooting it up, talking trash, pointing at Miami's bench, just really getting into it in a way that felt cathartic given everything that had happened. The SportsCenter crew showed Steph and Gary Payton II on the bench laughing at Podziemski's antics, but it was this weird laugh-to-keep-from-crying energy, like they were trying to find any moment of levity in what had otherwise been a devastating night. SVP made a comment that really resonated with me. He said something like, "You watch sports long enough and you accumulate these moments in your mental Rolodex. These injuries where you know in real time that you're watching something career-altering happen." He referenced other famous injuries. He didn't name specific ones out of respect, but we all know what he was talking about. Derrick Rose, Kobe's Achilles, Kevin Ware's leg. Those moments where the injury is so obviously severe that everyone watching knows immediately that nothing will be the same after this. And Butler's knee injury felt like one of those moments, at least according to the SportsCenter coverage. This wasn't a "let's wait for the MRI to see how bad it is" situation. This was a "everyone in the arena knew he blew out his knee" situation. The players knew, the coaches knew, the fans knew, and everyone watching on TV knew. Now it's just a matter of waiting for the official diagnosis to confirm what we all already suspect. The show then spent some time celebrating Andrew Wiggins because, as SVP pointed out, this night was supposed to be about him. They showed the pregame ceremony, where the Warriors played a tribute video and presented Wiggins with his championship ring in front of his kids. The footage of Wiggins getting emotional when his kids were brought out was really touching. Apparently, he was fine during the initial ceremony, but then got teary-eyed when they did a between-quarters feature with his children. Stephen A. went on this whole soliloquy about how every championship team needs an Andrew Wiggins type of player, a guy with star-level talent who's willing to accept a lesser role, who will defend the opponent's best player every night, who will make the hustle plays and hit the big shots even when he's only touched the ball 6 times all game. Wiggins was that guy for the 2022 Warriors, and Stephen A. was making the point that those players are incredibly valuable even if they don't always get the recognition they deserve. They showed a stat that Wiggins was actually the Warriors' best player in the 2022 playoffs in terms of plus-minus and defensive impact, which surprised me because I always think of that run as being all about Steph finally getting his Finals MVP. But apparently Wiggins was absolutely crucial, especially his defense on Jason Tatum in the finals, and the SportsCenter crew was giving him his flowers for that championship contribution. Windhorst made an interesting observation about Wiggins thriving in Miami's system. He said, "The pace that Miami plays at keeps Wiggins engaged in ways that Golden State's more methodical offense sometimes didn't. When you're playing in a fast-breaking, high-tempo system where you're touching the ball constantly, it's easier to stay locked in mentally." Wiggins sometimes had motor issues in Golden State, where he'd kind of drift through stretches of game. But in Miami, that hasn't been a problem because the style of play demands constant engagement. Then the conversation took a turn that I honestly wasn't expecting, but that felt necessary given the enormity of what had just happened. SVP posed a question to the panel: does this injury fundamentally change the Warriors' direction as a franchise? Are they now at a pivot point where they need to seriously consider tearing it down and rebuilding around youth? This led to some really fascinating discussion about what the Warriors should do next. One camp, represented by Stephen A., was arguing that you absolutely cannot give up on Steph Curry while he's still playing at an MVP caliber level. Steph is 36 years old and he's still elite, still the engine that makes everything work, still capable of being the best player on a championship team. You owe it to him to try to contend for one more title before his window closes, even if that means making aggressive moves that mortgage some of the future. But the other camp, represented by Windhorst, was arguing that maybe it's time to be realistic about where this team is headed. They're old, they're expensive, they just lost their third best player potentially for good, and the path to competing with teams like Oklahoma City and Denver feels increasingly impossible. Maybe the right move is to see if Steph would waive his no-trade clause to go chase a ring somewhere like Milwaukee, where he could play with Giannis, and the Warriors could get a massive haul of young players and picks to actually rebuild properly instead of this awkward two-timeline approach they've been stuck in. SVP asked directly, could you blame Steph if he asked out? If Steph came to the front office tomorrow and said, I still have it, I can still be the chef, I want one more legitimate shot at a championship, and I don't think it's happening here, would the Warriors be obligated to honor that request and trade him to a contender? The panel was split on this, but the consensus seemed to be that, yes, if Steph actually asked for a trade, you'd have to seriously consider granting it out of respect for everything he's done for the franchise. They also discussed what this means for the Jonathan Kuminga situation specifically. If Butler is done and the Warriors decide they're not trading Steph, does that mean Kuminga is now untouchable? Can they afford to trade away their only young wing with any kind of upside when they just lost Butler? Or alternatively, does Butler's injury mean the Warriors should actually be more aggressive about trading Kuminga while they still can, before his value drops even further? Windhorst's theory was that the Warriors probably won't attach draft capital to Kuminga anymore. They were reportedly willing to do that before Butler got hurt, as a way to make a win-now trade. But now that they're potentially looking at more of a retooling situation, giving up picks on top of Kuminga doesn't make sense. They might just hold on to him and see if he and Kerr can figure things out, especially now that there are major rotation minutes available with Butler out. The SportsCenter crew then brought in some guests who had been at the game, and their eyewitness accounts of what it was like in the arena when Butler went down were genuinely chilling. One reporter described the moment as the air being completely sucked out of Chase Center, this eerie silence except for Butler's screams of pain, and then this collective realization among everyone there that they'd just witnessed something really bad. Another reporter talked about the Warriors players' reactions in more detail. Apparently, Quinton Post, who ended up getting extended playing time because of lineup changes, was visibly shaken but played through it and actually had a decent game. Will Richardson looked like a lottery pick out there, according to one of the analysts, showing the kind of poise and skill that explains why he's generated some trade interest from other teams. But the overwhelming vibe from everyone who was at the game was just sadness and shock. This was supposed to be a celebratory night, honoring a former champion, and instead, it turned into this somber occasion where everyone was processing the potential end of Jimmy Butler's career. The Warriors won the game, which under normal circumstances would be a nice story about a team rallying after adversity, but it felt hollow given what they'd lost in the process. As the show was wrapping up, SVP made one final comment that I think encapsulated the entire evening perfectly. He said something like, "We came into tonight expecting to talk about Andrew Wiggins and nostalgia and championship memories, but instead, we're talking about Jimmy Butler possibly never playing basketball again. That's sports. That's life. Things change in an instant, and all you can do is hope for the best while preparing for the worst. They ended the segment by showing one more replay of Butler's best moments in a Warriors uniform. The defensive possessions, the clutch buckets, the high basketball IQ plays that made him so special to watch. SVP's voiceover talked about how Butler had only been with Golden State for half a season, but had already made such an impression with his game, his mentality, his competitive spirit. Even if that was the last time we see Jimmy Butler in a Warriors uniform, even if that was the last meaningful basketball he ever plays, at least Warriors fans got to experience his unique brilliance for a few months. The final message from SportsCenter was one of hope tempered with realism. Yes, everyone is hoping the MRI comes back better than expected. Yes, everyone is sending prayers and positive vibes to Butler and his family. But the reality, based on what we all saw and what the medical experts are saying, is that Butler's season is over, and his career is very much in jeopardy. At 35 years old with a knee injury that severe, the odds are stacked against him returning to anything close to his previous level. Watching that entire SportsCenter coverage, I kept thinking about how quickly everything can change in professional sports. 24 hours ago, we were talking about the Warriors figuring out their trade deadline strategy and whether they could make a deep playoff run. Now we're talking about whether their third best player will ever step on a court again, whether they should blow it all up and rebuild, whether this is the beginning of the end of the Steph Curry era in Golden State. Jimmy Butler injured his knee tonight, and depending on what that MRI shows, it might be the moment that fundamentally alters the trajectory of the entire Warriors franchise. That's what I took away from SportsCenter's coverage. The gravity of this moment, the uncertainty of what comes next, and the sobering reminder that in sports, as in life, everything can change in an instant.